My name is Amara Selwyn. Last week something happened that completely changed my life. It all started with a single phone call. I never imagined that one call could turn my world upside down. It began with my sister. She called me, and from the moment I answered, I could tell this wasn't a normal conversation. She demanded $150,000 from my savings. That's a lot of money, enough to buy a house, a car, and still have money left over. But she didn't ask. She didn't say, "Could you help me?" Or, "Would you lend me some money?" She demanded it. She said it was my responsibility because I had money and I was the stable one in the family. When I told her no, she exploded. She shouted, yelled, and made me feel like the worst person in the world for not giving her money. I thought that would be the end of it, but I was wrong. Very wrong. 2 hours later, my dad sent me a text. It was cold. So cold it almost didn't feel real. He said that I had two choices. Either I signed off on her mortgage and helped her, or I couldn't come back home. I stared at that message for a long time, feeling frozen. My mind spun, thinking about what this meant, about how my family could treat me like this. Then slowly I made a decision. I did the only thing that made sense to me. I bought a one-way ticket out of Nashville. I didn't tell anyone. I just left. Before leaving, I started shutting down every account my sister had ever touched. Old credit cards, shared logins, anything she ever used. I shut it all down. I made sure she couldn't take any more money from me. By midnight, my phone was blowing up. 37 missed calls. I had a feeling that the worst part of all this hadn't even started yet. And deep down, I knew there was a truth behind those calls, a secret I hadn't discovered yet. A truth that would change everything I thought I knew about my family. Once I found out, there was no going back. Not for me, not for them. Before I tell you exactly what happened after I closed those accounts and why leaving was the only choice I had, I need you to understand that nothing that came next was what I ever expected from the people who were supposed to love and protect me. By the next afternoon, my life still looked normal, at least on the outside. I was sitting at my desk in my Nashville office, answering emails, checking numbers, and counting down the weeks until I could move to Toronto. My savings were my bridge to that new life. I had worked so hard to save that money. I had said no to little treats, skipped small comforts, and saved every extra dollar I could. I guarded my savings like a treasure chest because I knew it was my ticket to the life I wanted. Then my phone lit up. It was my sister calling again. I didn't expect disaster. I thought maybe she was calling to tell me about another house she liked or some fun story about her kids. She always talked about big kitchens, fancy counters, and big yards. She never mentioned how much debt she and her husband had. I had learned to listen to her stories without offering money. I had learned to keep my distance from her wish lists because giving money always led to trouble. When the call connected, her voice was different. She didn't start with, "Hello," or ask how I was. She jumped straight into a fast, urgent speech like she had practiced it over and over. She told me about a house that had everything she ever wanted. It was in the perfect school district for her future kids. The price seemed almost magical, like it couldn't be real if you looked too closely. The bank and the seller were ready. The closing date was coming up fast. There was only one thing missing. That missing thing was me. She told me they needed $150,000 and she didn't ask nicely. She acted like it was a fact. She said I should feel proud of helping my family. In her story, my money wasn't mine. It was just waiting to be used for her. She wrapped her demand in warm words. She spoke about guest rooms where I could stay, about holidays my money would pay for, and about children who would grow up in a house I helped create. Sounded so perfect, like a storybook. But underneath it I felt something cold. She wanted me to be the safety net. She wanted me to fix her problems whenever they happened. Every detail she painted in her story went against the plans I had worked so hard to make for myself. I remembered late nights at the office, mornings when I skipped coffee to save a few dollars, the plans I had written in my Toronto spreadsheet. Flights, deposits, first and last month's rent, and a little cushion for emergencies. In her story, all of that could wait because her dream felt urgent. Two parts of me were pulling in opposite directions. One part was the younger sister who had always stepped aside. I had learned that keeping peace mattered more than keeping my own boundaries. The other part was the adult woman who had finally allowed herself to imagine a life that didn't revolve around fixing everyone else's problems. The first part knew how easy it would be to say yes and then rebuild later. The second part knew that later never really came. This wasn't just about a house or money. It was about whether I was willing to keep living as the person everyone depended on to solve problems. At that moment I felt something hard inside me. I wasn't angry yet. Anger would come later. What I felt was clarity. I could either protect the life I had been building or hand it over and hope gratitude would make the loss feel worth it. I knew from experience that gratitude would fade, but the cost to me would not. For the first time, saying no didn't feel selfish. It felt like survival. By the time evening came, the tension grew heavier. I closed my laptop, gathered my things, and started walking toward the parking lot. Every step felt like I was walking into a storm I couldn't see. Whatever came next wouldn't be about a house or a number. It would be about the place I held in a family that had already chosen its roles long before I even understood them. Then my phone buzzed. It was my dad, Lucian Selwyn. I knew exactly what that call meant before I even answered it. My dad believed that being the leader in a household meant being firm, even if it wasn't fair. He carried his expectations like they were law. I braced myself for his words, for the pressure I had felt since I was a child. Growing up, I had learned that the easiest way to survive was to remove my needs from the equation. Whenever something went wrong, the solution was simple. I had to adjust. If my sister needed space, I stepped aside. If she wanted attention, I quieted myself. If she struggled, I was told to compromise. These patterns had repeated so often that they felt like part of my character, not just habits I had learned to survive. Standing beside my car, keys in hand, I felt these patterns inside me. I could feel the instinct to explain, soften, and rationalize so no one else would feel hurt. But the events of the past few hours had changed something inside me. I was done bending until it hurt. Almost immediately after, my mom called. Seraphine Selwyn had a different way of controlling people. She didn't use rules like my dad. She used feelings. She could wrap guilt in words so sweet it felt like love. For years I thought I understood her love. But now I realized that what she asked for was always one-sided. Her sacrifices were never really shared. I listened to her words, sensing the expectation underneath. My stability existed to sustain everyone else's dreams. It was strange to be standing in a dim parking lot and realize that the woman who raised me had never really seen me as a separate person. I wasn't her daughter the way people usually imagine. I was the contingency plan, the person everyone counted on when something went wrong. The realization didn't feel comforting. It felt like grief. I was grieving a version of family I wanted but never really had. As the calls ended one by one, memories surfaced with new clarity. I remembered holidays where my achievements were ignored. I remembered decisions made without my input. I remembered the constant lesson that family unity mattered more than fairness. For the first time, I understood the structure I had lived under my entire life. My family wasn't built on care. It was built on hierarchy. My sister stood at the top, protected from consequences and wrapped in approval. My parents stood beneath her, reinforcing her comfort even when it cost them. And I stood at the bottom, holding everyone else steady because I was capable of doing it. The moment I imagined stepping away from that structure, everything trembled. That tremble was what my family was reacting to now. Not the money, not the house, but the threat of losing the person who had quietly kept the balance. As I drove home, city lights passing by in a blur, I sifted through emotions I hadn't had space to feel before. There was sadness for the family I wanted to believe in, frustration at the roles imposed on me, and a quiet certainty that everything was about to split open. I could feel it in the air, like people can sense a storm coming. It was subtle at first, but unmistakable. What settled inside me wasn't anger. It was something steadier. It was a recognition that I couldn't fix decades of imbalance by giving in one more time. If I continued playing my assigned role, I would be committing myself to a lifetime of being the solution to problems I didn't create. And that truth, more than anything else they had said, solidified the path I needed to take. The night felt heavier as I pulled into my driveway. But the weight was no longer something I felt obligated to carry. It was the weight of deciding I was done living as the quiet answer to someone else's crisis. The shift was subtle but powerful, an internal line drawn firmly without apology. I didn't know how my family would react when they realized I wasn't bending anymore. But for the first time, that uncertainty didn't scare me. It felt like freedom beginning to take shape, small but real, like the first light of dawn. Even as I parked my car, I thought about all the moments that had led to this. The sacrifices I had made, the times I had ignored my own dreams, the nights I had cried quietly so no one would notice. And I realized that leaving wasn't just about money. It wasn't about a house or a fight. It was about finally seeing myself as someone who mattered. Someone whose dreams deserved respect. Someone who could finally say, no. Not this time. Not anymore. From that moment on, I knew that everything would be different. My family might not understand. They might be angry, confused, or hurt. But I understood myself for the first time in a long time. And that understanding gave me courage. For years, I had been the quiet helper, the one everyone counted on. But now I was done being that person. I was no longer willing to let my life be guided by other people's emergencies. I was stepping into a new life, one that belonged to me. And as I walked into my house that night, I felt it. The lightness of choosing myself. The relief of finally drawing a line. And the quiet, growing certainty that this was the start of something new. Something free. Something of mine. Later that night, my house felt very quiet, almost too quiet. It was the kind of quiet that makes you feel like the walls are listening, like they are waiting for something to happen. I kept thinking about the phone call I had earlier that day. Every time I remembered it, my stomach felt tight and a small knot of worry grew inside me. Something about the way the day had gone made me feel like I needed to check all my money and accounts. I didn't want to check because I doubted myself. I trusted myself. I checked because I no longer trusted the people who had once said they loved me. I opened my laptop slowly, almost hesitating before clicking it open. That kind of hesitation comes from already expecting something bad, something that makes you nervous even before you see it. The first account I checked was a credit card I hadn't used in months. I barely remembered it, but something told me to start there. When the page loaded, I felt a cold, creeping unease in my chest. Seeing Isolde Selwyn's name listed as someone who could use the card felt like opening a door I thought was locked, only to find it standing wide open. I had completely forgotten she could still use anything of mine. The realization hit me with a finality I hadn't expected. It felt like a cold splash of water straight to the face. I started scrolling through the recent charges, and it felt like walking down a dark staircase I didn't want to see. Each step, each line on the screen made my stomach feel heavier. None of the purchases were emergencies. There were charges for fancy home decorations, salon visits, and even a weekend trip to a place only people with extra money could afford. $7,000 had quietly disappeared from a card I barely remembered. It wasn't the money that shocked me the most. It was the confidence behind the spending. Isolde had spent it assuming I wouldn't look. She had spent it because she believed she could. And the more I stared at the screen, the more I understood that this wasn't just about money. This was about access. Access she shouldn't have had. Access she had taken advantage of without even thinking twice. I thought back to all the times I had been told that helping her was just part of being family. For the first time, I saw those words differently. They weren't words of love or caring. They were instructions. They were expectations. They were orders hidden inside words that sounded kind. I removed her name from the account. Clicking the confirmation button felt heavier than it should have. It wasn't just a button. It felt like reclaiming something I didn't even realize I had lost. Control over my own life and boundaries. Filing the dispute for the charges felt less emotional. It was more like a step in a process, a step I had to take to protect myself. But even after I finished, the uneasy feeling didn't go away. If anything, it became sharper. I moved on to the next account, then the next, checking my checking account, my savings account, my retirement accounts, my investments. I looked at settings I had never thought about before. Old recovery emails, shared logins, passwords I had made years ago when I thought convenience was more important than security. All of it was there, and it made me realize how much access I had unknowingly given away. Then I opened a savings account I rarely used and my heart froze. Under the beneficiary section there was a familiar name. Isolde Selwyn. She wasn't a joint owner, but if anything happened to me she would get the money. This designation had been there for 5 years. Back then I thought I was being generous. I thought I was helping with wedding paperwork, making things simple for both of us. I never imagined it would turn into another way for her to take things that were never hers. Changing that setting felt like more than just a small administrative task. It felt like taking back a signature I had given with trust one no longer felt. When the confirmation email came through, a strange calm washed over me. Not happiness, not joy, but a quiet feeling of freedom I hadn't expected. After locking down the accounts, I looked at my digital life the same way. I changed all my passwords that I had used for years, removed old devices I didn't use, and set up new ways to log in that she couldn't guess. Every change felt like closing a window that had been left wide open, letting someone peek inside without my permission. I hadn't realized how exposed I had been, simply because I had never expected to need protection from my own family. As the night went on, the weight of everything started to feel different. It wasn't fear or anger that I felt. It was a realization. For years, I had treated access as trust and trust as something that would last forever. I hadn't considered that people who relied on me might one day think that reliance gave them ownership, that it gave them permission to take and spend however they wanted. The next morning felt strange. The air at work felt different, almost as if the day itself knew something important was about to happen. I sat in the break room holding a cup I wasn't even really drinking from, trying to steady my mind. Thoughts moved restlessly, circling the edges of a suspicion I could no longer ignore. When I finally opened my inbox, the first email was from Kaylin Voss, my financial advisor. Seeing her name made my stomach tighten, but there was also relief. Kaylin was meticulous, careful, and impossible to fool. If something had caught her attention, it meant the situation had grown beyond family drama. This was serious. Kaylin's report was detailed and precise. Even before I read every word, I could feel its weight. She had checked credit alerts, account histories, and financial patterns linked to anything with my name. What she found was not a small mistake. It wasn't an accident. It was a map showing decisions made behind my back, decisions I had been unknowingly supporting. The first part of the report laid out a trail of inquiries connected to large loans, all tied to Isolde's household. They weren't simple requests. They were full applications, made with confidence that suggested she expected approval. Seeing that pattern shook me. Isolde wasn't planning for safety. She was planning with the belief that I would always be there to support her. The next section went deeper. Kaylin had matched missing payments and penalties with times Isolde had mentioned money problems but never told the full truth about. There were unpaid balances, penalties, and attempts to refinance loans. It wasn't a temporary struggle. It was a pattern of instability held together with hope and denial. One part of the report hit me harder than anything else: an analysis of spending trends. Kaylin had flagged transactions from accounts Isolde had no real reason to know about. The pattern revealed someone moving money confidently, assuming access was a given. And beneath each line, I realized that I had been absorbing the consequences without even realizing it. Kaylin's breakdown of risk painted a sharp and painful picture. If I continued to support them, I wouldn't just be giving money. I would be putting my future at risk. Their debt wasn't accidental. It wasn't a one-time mistake. It was years of decisions made without balance, without restraint, without responsibility. They weren't asking for help, they were asking for rescue. And nothing in their history suggested they would change once they were saved. The realization settled heavily on me. For years, I had convinced myself that my sister's carelessness was just youthful optimism, that my parents' enabling was love. Kaylin's report stripped away those illusions. It wasn't optimistic. It wasn't love. It was a system built on the assumption that I would carry the consequences because I always had. As I scrolled to the final summary, I saw projected outcomes if I kept supporting them. Delayed career plans, compromised savings, long-term financial vulnerability. Seeing my future spelled out in numbers and charts made everything painfully clear. My family wasn't protecting my future. They weren't even thinking about it. They were treating my stability as an extension of their comfort. In that moment, the story of my life shifted. I wasn't looking at a request for support anymore. I was looking at a blueprint of dependency designed around the idea that I did not get to choose for myself. Every number, every debt line, every risk projection revealed the truth I had avoided naming. Helping them again would not save them. It would only destroy me. Sitting at my desk with the office noise fading into a distant hum, I felt a calm certainty. It wasn't dramatic or angry. It was clarity shaped by evidence. This wasn't about love or loyalty. It was about survival, my survival. And the report made one thing undeniable: stepping away wasn't abandonment. It was the first real act of self-protection I had ever allowed myself. By late afternoon, the pressure in the air felt heavier, as if every hour had been quietly arranging itself toward an inevitable confrontation. I tried to focus on work, hoping routine would steady me, but my thoughts kept drifting. The heaviness in my chest would not go away. I kept thinking about every transaction, every loan, every time I had been asked to step in. I remembered how I used to feel proud of helping. I remembered thinking that I was a good sibling, a good child. But now I could see that pride had blinded me. My help had been used as a safety net, A crutch, a tool for someone else to lean on without effort or responsibility. Even small details haunted me. I remembered sharing passwords for convenience. I remembered letting her have access to things I shouldn't have. Each memory now felt like a small mistake piled on top of many others. And the more I remembered, the more I understood that the problem wasn't just the money. It was the pattern. I thought about the way family had been talked about, how loyalty was praised above all else. I realized that loyalty wasn't wrong, but it had been misunderstood. Loyalty should not mean losing yourself. Loyalty should not mean letting someone else's choices control your life. That night and again the next morning I felt the quiet shift. It was no longer comforting. It was honest. And honesty revealed truths I hadn't been ready to admit before. I decided to take small steps but firm ones. I kept going through my accounts, double-checking every setting, every authorization. I changed all passwords again, added security questions, logged out old devices, and made sure no one could guess the answers. Every action, every click felt like building a wall to protect myself. It wasn't mean or cruel. It was necessary. As the hours passed, I thought about the future. I thought about what would happen if I continued helping them. The numbers Kaylin had shown me played in my head. Delayed plans. Compromised savings. Long-term vulnerability. It was a vision I couldn't ignore. It was a map of what my life could become if I didn't take control. And then I understood something important. My family wasn't thinking about me. They were thinking about themselves. Every request for help, every hint of need, had been built on the assumption that I would always respond. That I would always be the safety net. That I would always carry the weight. That was no longer acceptable. It hurt to admit, but it was true. Stepping away wasn't selfish. It wasn't cruel. It was survival. And survival sometimes means making hard choices. It means saying no when your yes has been taken for granted. It means taking back control over your life even if it feels uncomfortable or scary. By the end of the day, I felt a strange sense of relief. Not happiness, not joy, but relief. Relief that I finally understood the situation clearly. Relief that I could act with evidence and not just emotion. Relief that I could start building boundaries that would protect me in the future. I knew this was only the beginning. I knew more conversations, more realizations, more actions were coming. But for the first time I felt prepared. For the first time I felt like I had a plan for protecting myself, and that plan didn't rely on anyone else's promises or feelings. The quiet of the evening wrapped around me as I left work. It was no longer the uncomfortable, staged silence from before. It felt like space to think, to breathe, and to understand my next steps. I could feel the shift inside me, the slow turning of perspective. I wasn't a helper anymore. I wasn't a safety net for someone else's choices. I was a person who understood the value of my own stability, my own future, and my own life. And as the night fell, I knew that whatever came next, I was ready to face it. Not with fear, not with anger, but with clarity. Clarity that had been hidden for years, now shining brightly enough for me to see the truth. Helping the people who took for granted my love and trust would not save them. It would only destroy me. The truth I had discovered was something I could no longer ignore. It had been hiding quietly, but now it had grown too big to pretend it wasn't there. My phone buzzed again and I felt a strange, nervous feeling in my chest, the kind that makes your stomach twist and your hands feel heavy. I knew that whatever was on the other side of the screen was going to push me to make a decision I couldn't put off anymore. This time the message was not from my sister. It was from Lucian Salwin. Seeing his name made my chest tighten even more. There was a certain way he wrote messages that made it clear he always believed he was right. He never really needed to convince anyone else because, in his mind, no one could argue with him. I had grown up being trained to follow rules before I even understood why. I had been taught that obedience was not just something to do. It was something that kept you safe. And seeing Lucian's name, I felt that old, familiar tightening in my chest. His world was simple, or at least that's what he wanted it to be. In his world, you did what you were told. You followed instructions. You obeyed. Asking questions or saying no was like breaking a rule that everyone expected you to follow. If you didn't follow, you were disloyal. You were someone who couldn't be trusted. Reading his message didn't shock me. I have been here before. I had felt this exact feeling many times in my life. Then another message came. This time it was from Seraphine Salwin. Her words were warm and kind on the surface, but underneath there was something heavy. She had a way of making me feel like I was responsible for everyone else's happiness, safety, and comfort, but never for my own. Her messages were like a soft rope tied around my heart, pulling me toward guilt. Reading her words, I felt the old instinct stir inside me. The part of me that always wanted to explain, to fix, to compromise, to make everyone feel okay again. But deeper down, another voice spoke. It told me that I could no longer ignore the truth. Every time I had given in before, every time I had compromised, every time I had ignored my own needs, it had built a system. That system made everyone believe that my boundaries didn't matter. It made them expect me to always give up my comfort and dreams for theirs. For years, I had thought that family unity meant sacrificing myself. I believed that staying quiet kept the peace. I thought that minimizing my own needs made it easier to love. But now I could see clearly that every compromise I had made was a lesson for them. It taught them that my wants, my feelings, and my dreams were optional. I realized that giving in had never been harmless. It had trained them to assume that I would always step aside. That was not something I could allow to continue. Something inside me had shifted. It didn't feel like rebellion or anger. It felt like stepping into the sunlight after being in a dark, cramped room for too long. I left work early because I needed space to think, to breathe, to let my mind wander and untangle all the knots of old feelings. Sitting in my car, I remembered countless moments where I had been pushed aside, ignored, or expected to step in without question. These weren't small, random events. They were pieces of a long-standing pattern. I had been carrying this weight without even realizing how heavy it was. I understood then that their urgency and pressure weren't really about needing my help. It wasn't about saving money, time, or energy. It was about keeping a system that always benefited them. Saying no now wasn't just about refusing one small request. It was shaking the entire structure they had built around my obedience. Driving home, I felt the tension in my chest grow sharper. Their messages weren't polite. They were commands. They believed they had the right to my future, my stability, and all the plans I had built for myself. And the more I thought about it, the clearer it became that they had never meant to give me a choice. They expected me to fold because folding was what I had always done. But now something had changed. I had changed. When I pulled into my driveway, the decision I had to make felt simple. I wasn't choosing between family and freedom. I was choosing between repeating a cycle that had drained me for years, or stepping into a life where my decisions truly belonged to me. Inside the house, I moved with a calm I hadn't felt in a long time. I opened the travel folder I kept tucked away in a drawer. Inside were the flight options I had researched weeks earlier. Toronto had always been the plan, the place I wanted to go to rebuild myself, to start over, to grow without anyone pulling me back with expectations I had never agreed to carry. Until that moment, booking the flight had felt like a distant dream. But now it felt like the only choice that made sense. As I clicked through the flight options, my chest tightened. But this time it wasn't fear. It was the strange, powerful feeling of choosing myself without saying sorry. The confirmation screen popped up, and for the first time in many years, I felt a quiet strength where guilt used to live. This wasn't running away. It wasn't revenge. It was taking back my life. When the confirmation email arrived, I felt the change inside me solidify. I had taken my first step out of a life that had been built around other people's control. Whatever waited for me on the other side, I knew one thing for sure. This choice was mine. And for the first time it belonged to me alone. The quiet that followed felt heavy, but in a good way. It was the kind of quiet that only comes when all the ropes tying you to the past have finally snapped. I remember standing in the small rental apartment I found in Oak Park, surrounded by half-open boxes. I felt steady, calm, and strong. My family had always insisted that choosing myself was reckless. But the stillness inside me felt like the first real peace I had experienced in many years. News about Isolde came sooner than I expected. I found out through a financial alert from an old shared account I had forgotten I was still watching. Her credit score had dropped because she hadn't paid her bills. She had grown used to taking what wasn't hers, expecting others to fix her problems. Now all the consequences were landing on her shoulders. I didn't feel happy about it. I just felt clarity. People don't change because someone begs them to. They change when they have to face the results of their own actions. Lucian's downfall was quieter but deeper. He had built his identity around keeping up appearances, around looking perfect in the eyes of everyone else. But once neighbors and friends learned that he had pressured me into signing papers I never agreed to, the respect he depended on disappeared. In a small town like Maple Glen, reputations don't fall with a bang. They disappear quietly, like someone stopping noticing you. And for a man like him, That silence was heavier than any argument I could have ever made. Seraphine suffered in a different way. For years she had wrapped every decision in the language of loyalty. But loyalty without boundaries is a cage. When she realized I wasn't coming back, no visits, no calls, no holidays out of obligation, she lost the illusion that her approval could control me. Her messages became shorter, unsure, like someone stepping into a room they didn't recognize. I didn't reply. There are times when staying away is not cruel. It is survival. Life in Chicago moved faster than I had expected. My new job gave me clarity I hadn't known I was missing. Every morning I walked into the research lab knowing that my work belonged to me alone. No one claimed it, no one reshaped it, no one took credit for it. This independence felt like a muscle growing stronger after years of being ignored and overlooked. I wasn't running from my family anymore. I was walking toward the version of myself that had waited far too long to breathe. Weeks passed before their last attempt to reach me arrived. It came in the form of a formal letter from a lawyer tied to the Selwyn household. It wasn't a threat. Just another attempt to shift responsibility. I skimmed it once, folded it, and placed it in a drawer I would never open again. There had been a time when something like that would have shattered me. Now it felt like the closing act of a story I had already stepped out of. What surprised me most wasn't their persistence. It was the absence of any real regret. Not one word acknowledging the harm they caused. Not a single sign that they saw me as anything other than a tool they had lost. That realization cemented something I had been trying to understand since the day I bought that one-way ticket. Leaving wasn't abandonment. It was released. The months that followed reshaped me in ways I didn't recognize at first. Grocery runs no longer made my chest tighten. Evenings were free from waiting for my phone to light up with demands. Waking up no longer felt like carrying the weight of other people's expectations. Peace doesn't always come with fireworks and fanfare. Sometimes it comes in the form of nothing. No noise, no guilt, no pressure. Just quiet, steady peace. I thought about Isolde occasionally, usually when reviewing financial records at work. Her overspending, her cycles of denial, her constant assumption that someone else would pay the bills. These were footprints of privilege she had always relied on. Now her downfall wasn't dramatic, but it was final. Denied mortgages, eviction warnings, and a shrinking circle of people willing to absorb her mistakes. It was the kind of ending that fits real life, quiet but inevitable. As for me, I rebuilt my life without ever looking back. I learned that healing isn't always soft. Sometimes it is quiet. Sometimes it is the steady decision to stop giving yourself to people who see you as replaceable. It is refusing to justify your boundaries. It is walking forward even when the past shouts at you to turn around. And here is the truth I want anyone listening to understand. Family can be full of love. But it can also be the first place that teaches you to forget yourself. The real test is not whether you stay. The real test is whether you see that staying is hurting you. Walking away did not make me heartless. Walking away made me whole. And if you have ever had to choose between being needed and being respected, I hope you choose the path that lets you breathe freely again.